if you go down their line of thinking, someone can make you, if you don't know any better, they can make you believe anything.
Hey, dude, I feel like everybody's right and everybody's wrong.
100%. Why is this important? Why are we even going here? He's helped a lot of guys. He's also not had success with a lot of guys.
Come in with a purpose, and they're very intentional with what they do and how they do it.
From the majors to the sandlot, baseball and softball share space in one place. Welcome to the farm system.
Fellas, and the ladies, welcome to another episode of The Farm Unfiltered. Yeah, this one's going to be a little pop-off. We'll see how it goes, huh, Code?
Yeah, no, you didn't even need me for the ladies thing, too. So
Yeah. Well, I didn't know if you were ready to step in.
we're going to run. We're going to run today.
Listen, if we got to write it down. If you're stepping in on the ladies, I'm in on that.
Hey,
You know what I'm saying?
we're all getting each other's backs, right?
Okay, cool. All good. Yeah, no, so here we are again. We actually, too, have had some podcasts. We've had some good ones coming out. So this one will probably come out here in a couple of weeks, but there's a couple that are coming out over the next couple of weeks that are fire me up. Fire me up. What do you got? What do you got today for us, Code?
Yeah, no, I mean, so came in and, man, wanted to shoot a podcast. I mean, there's topics on topics all the time, from training to social media to people talking crap to people loving stuff. And so definitely a topic I think is interesting was the one you were showing me this morning. The reverse scissor kick.
For Robert Riggins. Shout out to you and your
that
8-year-old.
one was pretty cool. I think that'll be cool to look at. And then, then dive into some stuff probably about like transfer to game too. I think that'll be a good one. We talk a lot about like us in the cage and a lot of the drill work that we do. I think it'll be cool to kind of dive into transferring stuff in game and kind of the gap that people tend to have from the cage to their game swing and why. Hear a lot about that, and then having some fly-ins and whatnot. Like always feels good in the cage, but then I get in game. So I think that'll be cool to dive into for a lot of people. So seems like a common problem in the game is they get in the cage and they're superstars, and they get out on the field and it doesn't play. It's my cage swing feels good, but little secret, there's something behind that. So want to dive into that too. So let's go ahead and start with the reverse scissor kick thing.
For sure, yeah. No, and also too, again, I think when we get into from the cage to the field, we've had a lot of pro guys of recent coming in, and they've had some crazy results and some crazy time frames that I think will be big to kind of touch on there as well, for sure. So the first one was Robert Riggins, who is now, I think he's the Dominican Republic. What is it, DSL or DLS? Yeah, DSL. Coach for the Giants. And he kind of posted, I think it was his 8-year-old, and he, right before the pitch comes, he steps backwards like he's almost has an open stance. And then as he swings the ball, and then also if you're watching the video here, we'll put it in there. But as he swings, his front foot actually comes over home plate, and then he hits a ball. Ends up getting a base hit on. In any case, he just posted it because it was funny, and kids do wild things, and I really love watching kids move because they don't have any, or I shouldn't say any, they have very little preconceived ideas of how they need to move, and because of that, you can see a lot of natural human movement that hasn't been coached. That's just how they move. That's how our human body moves, how it creates force. And so he kind of posted it as like, just funny, like, reverse scissor kick. Cause, and again, I'm sure from his perspective is like, okay, the reason he said reverse scissor kick, because instead of the back leg going behind his son, his front leg was going in front of his son as he was swinging. And so he posted as kind of funny, and, Casey Fisk had reposted it, and he was like, I'm not going to teach you, but hey, you got a hit from it, blah, blah, blah. And then, obviously for us, it's actually a drill that we do where we call it back leg swings. And so I've been doing it for, I think we started back at 108, probably, I want to say like 3-4 years ago now, probably. But in any case, there's a big part of that when it goes into like how the body actually creates force, because when you go to like a kid or something like that, right? Like they don't have any ideas of how they think they need to create force, how they've been taught to, this is how I rotate, this is how I do things. They just swing, right? And so you commonly see some of those patterns that kind of come out that don't have any human involvement or disruption within how it's moving. And so you kind of can see some very pure forms. And so a lot of them, for example, like let's say you take a youth athlete, and we actually did this. We posted about this quite a bit back in the day. You can probably go search this up on social media. Where one time we went to Eugene Bleecker at 108 when we went and watched his daughters play, and they were both like I want to say they were like 6 or 7 or something like that at the time. And we went and watched them play and like helped coach. And so when we were there helping coach, we started videoing like every hitter that was hitting. And when they were hitting, like almost none of them rotated their feet. Like every single one of them rotated from their middles, feet stay anchored, which is one of the sayings we used to say at 108 all the time too, is we used to say a thing becomes a thing when everybody does the opposite. And so the meaning kind of behind that was the reason squish the bug is a thing is because youth athletes most of the time never rotate their feet. And again, along with that, we look at professional athletes, we say, oh, look, like see the back leg, turning, you see a still photo of like them on their toe or whatever that is. And, again, TV from certain angles and stuff like that, where you don't get to see things, in slow motion and happen so fast. A lot of times, again, they're like, okay, well, a professional athlete's doing this and my son's doing this. And I want my son to be a professional athlete. So they go down the thought process of, I need to start making him rotate his feet. The problem with that, though, is that, again, is misunderstandings of the human body does change over time, and so with that, when they're youth, just like when you have a baby, you can grab a baby and like grab their foot and like put it to their forehead or like put it behind their back or do some wild stuff, because again they have so much flexibility. And now along with that, like again, like with a kid, when they go to rotate, they have so much flexibility, especially in their whole body, but definitely in comparison to adults in their lower body when it comes into, dorsiflexion, when it comes into IR and ER from their pelvis, when it comes into even movement and rotation they're getting from, like their tib and fib, even their knee, like they have a lot more range of motion that like an adult just wouldn't have. And because of how tight the connective tissue and all those things end up getting over time. And this is also a big thing when it comes into, really big when it comes into strength development, because that tension is also a good thing, right? So again, that connective tissue is going to get tighter and more with more bounce back when you're constantly moving this way and you're using your body in that way. The body always responds to a demand. If there's a demand that it needs to move a certain way, it's going to do so. So a lot of times, again, along with that is that we start teaching kids to rotate their feet, they need to do this because they need to use their legs, quote unquote, right? And also there's this presumption that because their feet aren't rotating, that they're not using their legs, or because their knee isn't diving underneath their body, that they're not using their legs. And so again, my next question always comes to what we've always assumed here is like, okay, but how do you know they're not using their legs, right? And what I mean by that is, of course, they're using their legs. They just might not be using them in the ways that you have seen them used, or also too that you don't understand. And so, again, like for example, if you were to measure ground force for any of those athletes, and also too, if you were to see activation and all the muscles within the legs and all those things at the same time, you'd probably see a lot of activation. But just because there isn't movement, or again there isn't this big turn or any of those other things, that you think that there isn't force being made. And again, obviously, with us having the opportunity to also train some pretty young guys that we do in here, everybody assumes that we all just have big leaguers and stuff in here. But yeah, we again with we have had 9 and 10-year-olds on the force plate. I think we even had an 8-year-old, right?
Yep.
Even on the force plate is, again, you get to see these forces at play with how they move and some of those things as well, but things we've known kind of for years. But for example, like I said, for that, going back to that Robert Riggins video, is again, just like when you're on a farm board, there's a reason that the front board slides towards home plate and why that's so important. And that's something that I've learned over the years. When we first started using farm boards, we didn't want the front board to move at all. I used to cue guys for it not to move, which is actually funny. It was actually funny because it actually got it to move more, and we've talked about that over the time. Where again, if they like actually learn to engage with it and try it for it not to move, they actually create a bracing force, which again puts ground force into the ground. And it actually makes it move more by trying to get it not to move at times, and so that could be a really good cue. But again, going back to that is a lot of people look at a kickback or a scissor and they're looking at the back leg. And they don't understand that again, it's a result, which a lot of people say that as well. Like, yes, it is a result. It can also be a teach, right? Results can also be a teach, just like when we say external goals, like when we say, hey, hit a double. Again, that's a result, but we can cue a result to get the body to move a certain way, right? A lot of the things that people, again, when they see we kind of talked about this with a pro guy last week, right? When we had the conversation of, if you see a car driving down the road, or it's in a race, right? Let's say you're racing, two teams that build cars are racing against one another. When you see a car hitting a turn a certain way, you see it staying low, you see how well it's handling or holding onto the track or staying anchored or whatever, coin term you want to give it. Again, any really good mechanic, what he's going to do is, again, they're going to walk up to the car after the race and be like, dude, like, pop the hood. I want to see what's going on underneath, inside this car. I want to see what you got in here. You got twin turbos and you got this suspension system, and what transmission do you got in here? And, how are you running this and how are you running that? Right. So a lot of times what we're trying to do is, I think, like finding a needle in a haystack. Basically what we're doing is that we've been watching video of these race cars, right? Professional athletes. And we're just assuming what's going on underneath the hood and trying different things out. Like, hey, I see his knee move, so drive your knee. Hey, I see his foot move, so try to spin your foot. All these things, when in reality, those are, again, results, right, of what's going on underneath the hood. And so a lot of times when people also see, even our hitters, doing kickbacks or something like that, right? They don't understand that a lot of that is also coming from the front leg. Right? That there's a massive front leg force that's going on. And also, too, how we cue the body to create force is what actually keeps it anchored from a technique perspective, comparatively to just, yes, is there a flexibility component? 1000%, right? If I'm going to rotate from an anchored femur, or again, anchored with both my feet in the ground, right? If I'm going to rotate away with my feet to stay in the ground, a main reason that people can't stay in the ground is they don't have the flexibility to do it. They're not a child, they're not a kid, and also, too, because they don't normally rotate like that, and they're not challenged to do so, and they're able to just come out of the ground and still hit a baseball. They get away from that technique. That's a lot of times why we do yoga blocks. That's a lot of times why we force them to get back in the ground and rotate with both their feet anchored, where they have to learn how to rotate and keep their feet in the ground. Because it's something they get away from and they start spinning. And then also, too, again, along with that is where people get really confused as well, as, they watch TV or something like that and they see a professional athlete like, oh, look, like his front foot comes out of the ground. It's like, yeah, but also, too, along with it, like, can I still create force and my feet come out of the ground? 1000%. But again, I can only use the floor as long as I'm in the ground or the floor. So the moment that I come out and I get unplugged, that's when I'm gonna have issues from being able to use the ground as an anchor source for me to be able to amplify the force I'm creating. So I think one of the big things I love with those youth incidents there, Code, is that you get an opportunity to see what's going on underneath the hood when you remove the feet from the ground, and you get that better understanding of what forces are being created and that we get to see because we have a force plate. But also, too, a massive disadvantage for so many people out there that don't get to see force plate data. And even if they do have force plate data, like actually understanding what those forces mean and how it points into human movement is a whole nother thing. And so I think I love little opportunities like that where you get to see the body just doing what it needs to do to create force, and adults looking around and being like, haha, isn't that funny? And it's like, actually, there's so much insight that's available if we just look around and remain curious,
Yeah. A few points that you made was talking about the baby being able to like put their leg behind their back, and also like mobility and flexibility. Something that I hear a lot of kids come in here is like, oh, I gotta stretch, I gotta get more flexible and this and that. And something I want to point out is those younger kids were always, I mean, I'm not a parent, but my parents, and I've seen other parents, like they're very, very careful with young kids. Like they're fragile, right? But they're very flexible, let's say. Right? But as you get older, right? You get a little bit tighter, get a little bit stronger, right? And so there's also a point that I want to make. There's a difference between just being flexible and mobile.
Yep, different things.
You know, like just being able to touch your toes, or you know, be able to put your arms behind your back in some crazy, like, you know, I think there's always this, like, again, um, it's like a misconception.
Yeah.
You know, all these kids come in here and think they got to stretch. These coaches
Yeah.
are like, oh, you gotta get looser, you gotta stretch, you can't even touch your toes,
Mhm.
this and that. It's like,
Mhm.
well, also too, then they get really mobile, or they go do yoga,
Yeah.
right? And they don't have strength through these ranges of motion now that they have,
Mm.
and they get to these really extreme like layback or
Yeah.
you know whatever, and it's like then
Yeah.
they tear something, and so
Mhm.
just a
Which
misconception that
yoga instructors do all the time.
yeah.
And that's another thing. If flexibility is the main thing that kept you away from injury, then yoga instructors should never have an injury. When it comes to like, like tearing something. And if you actually look like again, a lot of times too, especially when they do something like something with force,
Mm,
very easy for like a yoga instructor or something
mhm.
like that to hurt themselves because of
Yeah.
all this range of motion they have.
Yeah, not that flexibility is a bad thing, but
No.
to just a very common thing that you see like high school kids, they're just consuming all sorts of information. It's like, you know, they hear their coach say this or social media say that, and it's just something that I want to put out there is like just being able to stretch and be more flexible doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be healthier, right?
100%.
You know, you have to have some
Catchers
range
do that a
of
lot,
motion.
even major
Yeah,
league level.
for sure.
They try to do, again, there a couple years ago I was consulting for a team, and like again, their catchers were all wanting to do a whole bunch of yoga,
Mhm.
and I'm like, dude, you guys already have
Yeah.
way more range of motion than almost everybody on the team when it comes to your pelvis. And then on top of that, you guys are trying to go do a whole bunch of yoga. Which again, it's not that the flexibility is bad. And again, there's a separator there is that we don't interchangeably want to use, and I want to define that. We don't interchangeably want to use flexibility and mobility interchangeably because they mean different things.
Hmm.
Flexibility is more like passive range of motion, where I have the flexibility to get into that range of
Mm,
motion. Mobility is more from an active perspective. So some people may not understand is that, for example, I might have more range of motion in my pelvis, but actively I might not be able to access it
mhm.
for a multitude of reasons. And it doesn't, again, passive range of motion, like it is a requirement for me to have range of motion
Yeah.
into something. But also, too, even if I'm passively, stretching into something, there might be resistance there, and there always is resistance there for a reason. But with it as well, that resistance isn't always a bad thing. And a lot of times it's not, especially for an athlete. Like if he has got, tension or he's tight somewhere, the body is always responding to a demand. So it's not tight for no reason. Your shoulder just your tissue, and this is a Randy Sullivan line, is that the soft tissue doesn't have free will,
Mhm.
right? Which it doesn't just do what it wants to do, right? There's a demand placed on it where it needs more stability, so it gets tight,
Mhm.
either neuromuscular tension, right, or comes into actually connective tissue tension that you may have, and again, shortening and tightening of muscles, all those things. It's all responding to a demand. All of it goes in together. So a lot of times, if you just loosen up what the body is made tight,
Mhm.
you're usually going to see an injury right afterwards. And that's where it's not so simple being like, oh, I'm tight here, I'm just going to go stretch.
Mhm.
Because again, like let's say my shoulder feels tight and I start stretching my shoulder. Well, I probably, again, might actually have an issue with, supportive muscles in my scap or stabilizers in my scap, my rotator cuff, X, Y, and Z, all these other things. And they might be compensating or also just a movement deficiency that I might be having of how my brain is moving. And because of that, it's causing tightness in another area because it's overworking to take over for something that's not happening.
Mhm.
And so a lot of times you're like, oh, my hamstrings are tight, I'm going to stretch my hamstrings. Well, you go stretch your hamstrings and then you go tear your hamstring the next week,
Mhm.
right? And then it gets coined off on, well, we knew your hamstrings were tight.
Yeah.
And it's like, no, his hamstrings were tight,
Mhm.
but it was because there was a pelvic issue. Again, when it comes into, the stability and things that, pelvic stability issue that we were having. And now when you loosen up the hamstring, now he didn't have any, he didn't have any stabilization in his hamstring or his pelvis. And again, obviously then you start to see some injuries. So it's
Mhm.
not just so easy where it's like, oh, this is tight, so I'm going to stretch it. There's usually something else going on
Yeah.
that's important. And I just kind of wanted to break that up. Like we don't want to say flexibility when we mean mobility, and we don't want to say
Mhm.
mobility when we mean flexibility.
Yeah, for sure. And flexibility is just so much easier to hey, go stretch. You know, it's
That's
kind of,
easy.
I'm not saying it's a cop out, but it can be a cop out. Like,
For sure.
hey, I don't know how to train you to be more mobile.
Yeah.
But I can tell you to go,
Hmm.
try to touch your toes and stretch your hammies or this,
Yeah.
there's so
And a
many old
big,
school stretches that, people will just give all the time. It's like, oh,
Mhm.
this will make you better.
For sure. Well, and that's why I wanted to point that out is that there's all on it. This is also a massive misconception. A massive misconception is that flowy movement is because they have a whole bunch of flexibility.
Yeah.
And that is something that is largely misunderstood
Yeah.
is that flowy movement, does it have aspects of flexibility? Sure. Does it have aspects of mobility? Absolutely. Also, the other parts that come into actually how you're training your CNS system, and largely, we talk about this a lot, but the coordination aspect. And again, there was actually a podcast not too long ago where Stuart McMillan was talking about this with sprinters, is that understanding that, and also Greg Rose actually right afterwards came out with where they posted it from TPI.
Mm.
I don't think it came on Base U, but it was TPI's social media, where he goes into and he starts talking about how, for example, just because you go to a PT and you have a whole bunch of mobility now, or extra range of motion flexibility now, it doesn't mean that your brain knows how to use it.
Mm.
And it definitely doesn't know how to use it when it comes into a very forceful and a limited amount of time. And so one of the examples that we talk about with this as well is, and this kind of goes in probably a good transition into from training into the game, is that I kind of explained it like this. I've been saying this the last couple of weeks is like, hey, again, if I was leaving my house and I was coming to work, and let's say I was running late, right? If I was running late, I'm not going to try a new route to work today, right? Like I know the way that I normally go to work. I know that it normally takes me like, 23 minutes. So I know how long it's going to take me. And if I take this other route, maybe it's faster, but at the same time, again, I'm not used to that route. I don't know what's going to pop up, all these other things. Maybe a day when I have more time, I'll take that other route. But today, when I'm in a hurry, I'm going to take that other route. I'm going to take the route that I always take because it's the fastest route. I know what turns to take and how long the light takes. I'm used to my, all my things. I've got my routine down, right? My same food spots. I know where I could stop. All those things, right? Well, when we come into like a human body and your brain is kind of the same way. When it's underneath time constraints, it's going to do what it's most comfortable with, and also too what it knows how to coordinate very rapidly. Because you have to think about, again, human movement's very complex in this way. Is that it's actually amazing. Like when you start to understand all the things that the body does to make sure like movement happens, and all how amazing our systems are. Before we're still studying, there's so many things with the body, especially when it comes from the CNS system and like how our brains and how it coordinates everything. Like there's still massive, areas that we're still diving into in that sector of human movement. But one of the big things is that it actually checks in, joint by joint. It feels with intention, and that's why fascia is so important as well. It's like it's a sensory organ, and it's super important. That's the same organ, again, when you feel heat, how quickly you pull away so you don't get burned. It's actually, again, our actual normal nervous system, and I guess it's still in prong. There's just more inserts when it comes into fascia, is that it can transfer information rapidly, way faster. Again, muscle feedback is way slower. Not even, I think it's like 9 times slower than it comes to fascially or something like that. But in any case, again, it gets back into that. It's just like when it comes into your body coordinating and rapidly turning on and off muscles, it's not everything turned on at the same time. That's very easy to do, is turn on every muscle and just be stationary and, flex like the Hulk and just, get your flex in. But athletically, to be able to smoothly transition and turn muscles on and off rapidly, and coordinating a movement, where it comes into, how hard, and again, it's just like, it's important too, like, even too, like for our bodies, like I've picked up this water bottle a couple times, so I have an understanding of how much it's going to weigh. My brain is predicting how much it's going to weigh, right? And then my recruiting process, when I go to pick it up, I recruit that amount of muscle tension, so that I can pick it up and create enough force to pick it up. Now, sometimes you see this happen where, for example, you might have picked it up, like, for example, if your water bottle, if you had picked it up a second ago and then we like switched it out and I went and poured it out and picked it up, you're going to pick it up and recruit like so much muscle to pick it up, because your brain is for looking at the task and it's understanding what it needs to actually complete that task, it recruits differently. And that's a big part where when, we have guys that are like training them to react differently, which is what they're doing actually in the cage and what they're doing when they actually get on the field, is that we have to make sure that action and perception gap, that perception and action gap, we start to actually train the body to react differently. And even though a lot of people for a long time was like, you can't do that. I mean, obviously we can do that. They've been doing it for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years. Sometimes science wise, if you don't go deep enough, it can kind of get to, you can be in the forest and you're kind of confused on how the body actually does things. But also with that, like we can do that. And that's something that, again, is a very particular process that we go about of how we get athletes results from the cage to the field.
Yeah. And then from the cage to the field too is, like you said, we have kids that are 8 to, big league guys, all ages in here too. And, when it comes from cage to the field, one is as a former athlete and someone who has dove into a lot of these topics, I'm well aware how many different factors are come into play when it comes to taking stuff to the field. From now, we're having these conversations with these kids that come in here and hit, and it's like they're playing every weekend, and they also play every Tuesday and Thursday, and they're going to private schools. That school's not easy, and then they have a job, and then some kids stay up and still play Xbox. It's like, I'll ask them, hey, what's going on? Blah, 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 blah. Oh, I'm tired. Why are you tired? I stayed up too late playing video game. It's like all these different things that come into play. Or, hey, what'd you eat today? Just like through basic conversations, like whatever. Oh, I didn't eat today. It's like all of these things like add up. It's like, when it comes into how much they do in the cage, they could also haven't drank a bottle of water in a week, and they're only eating nerds and red vines and
I'm talking about.
all these different things that play a factor into it. And it's it's just very interesting when you start diving into that, like, okay, there really is so much more to this than just see ball, hit ball,
Yeah.
And then also too, muscle memory. Well, also too, there's bad muscle memory, which is what I wanted to get into in the cage of, kids will go hit off the tee because maybe they don't have people to hit with, right? And which is, I did that. I hit off the tee every day in my life. It was my favorite tool. It's just something I knew I could count on the TV in there because never had work or anything else, right?
Yeah.
And but also too, the ball's not moving, right? And so you could get away with things on the tee that you can't when someone's throwing 92 with the slider, right? And I'd always go, early in the morning or midday in college, and I would hit on the tee. This is like sophomore, junior year. It's kind of funny looking back at it now. It's like I'll go hit off the tee on the field at home plate, and I'd be hitting the balls in the gaps. I'm like, ooh, yeah, practice is going to be nice today. It's like I'm hitting line drives gap to gap. Then I get to practice, and I was just like, awful. It's just terrible. I'm like, and now I'm going back and looking at these like old videos on my phone. It's funny because I show you some of them, and then we joke about it. It's like, how am I getting blown up off the tee? But it's like at the time, ball's not moving. You can do some moves that you can get away with when the ball's not moving. It's in the same spot over and over again, and this and that. And then
They're also
practice.
They're also if that was the task, if the task was the brain's literally doing exactly what you ask it to do, right? Like you're putting a ball in a tee and you're saying, I want to hit this ball in the gap and I want to hit it as far as I can. With these constraints, like it's conforming and self-organizing to that constraint, and trying to hit this ball as far as possible. And to do so, again, along with it, again, I don't have to worry about all these other things. I'm not doing the task of actually trying to have to hit. I'm basically golfing, right? I'm kind of golfing in this way. And again, along with it, not only am I golfing, I'm also golfing and landing it in a massively large area. So again, along with that, it's like I've conformed to this other task. And again, please don't hear right in between. Everybody should know by now that I love the tee. There's nothing wrong with the tee. It's how we use the tee, and we actually have to make sure that when we're doing it, that we're not just going into. We have to constrain it enough where that we're working on the right things, and the tool can be the tee could be a great tool,
It can be an awful one.
or it can be an awful tool. Everything works, everything sucks. It just matters how we use it, and what we're actually working on. And again, the same thing too. I can use, again, I can use a tee for good, and get someone real like a lot better, dramatically better off the tee, or I can use a tee to make someone really bad. And it goes both ways. along with it. But it's important there that in the same thing is like you were hitting better at the task that you were giving it and what you were telling yourself that you were trying to train for. You're just training for things that don't play and what you're actually trying to get better at, which is the game, not just hitting off the tee.
Yeah, no, and that's the thing too, is like I use the tee almost every day with all of our hitters, but too very intentionally, and like I explain that to them too. You can't just get in here and leg kick to the moon and take G hacks all the time, especially off the tee, right? And then so to your point, and then I've also had this conversation with some of the people that have flown in recently. It's like, the constraints that we do have, like you have to hit it between foul lines, you have to hit it. It's 9-on-1. You got all these defenders, balls moving. You can throw at different locations, different speeds, different spins. Umpire calling balls and strikes. All these different.
Yeah, you crush it.
Right?
You crush it. They catch it. Rob your home run. All
you have all these constraints, and which kind of goes back to the young kid. Is we have a 10-year-old that hits with us. And it's funny is sometimes, I'll throw a cue out at him, see how he receives it. Like, hey, hit this ball as hard as you can. He'll leg kick, he'll stride to open, and he'll swing and miss and foul it back. And I'll be like, okay, now hit this ball as hard as you can, but if you swing and miss, you have to get out of the cage. What does he do? Gets his front foot down early, slightly closed off, feet don't rotate, and he hits the missile. Yeah. And it's like, very similar, but like slightly more specific with the second cue.
Yeah.
And again, too, like what's the game? Like the game was to just create as much force and swing as hard as you could, and it didn't matter where you hit it or if you did hit it.
Yeah.
Right. Great. Cool. But the game is like you got these foul lines. You got 4 people on the infield plus a pitcher. Then you got 3 outfielders, and I know the shift's going away, but like then they can shift in specific areas, and
they still got a pretty good movement. They just can't be in certain areas.
Yeah. And like with that too is like you got all the, and then again, pitchers are just getting better, throwing harder, tighter spin, more spin, all these things like
figuring out how you actually hit, so they're change, how they change speeds, delay, mess up rhythm,
for sure,
all that stuff.
And then, but there's all these constraints too. It's like there's more to the game than just hitting the ball hard or swinging the bat hard.
Yeah.
And then too, that's something that's very easy for, in my opinion, just watching all the high school kids. They'll go in there and just hit off the tee, and they'll try to hit the ball as hard as they can.
I'm hearing somebody argue right now, being like, yeah, but when they're young, why don't you just let them swing hard and swing and miss, and who cares now? And then later on, we'll just tighten it back up, right? It used to be my philosophy around it. And this is a good point. I wanted to make this as well, is that a lot of times, and this is just can be applied in any part of your life in any different category, it doesn't matter about hitting or not, is that if you go down a line of thinking, right? That's why like when you're trying to understand someone's line of thinking, if you go down their line of thinking, someone can make you, if you don't know any better, they can make you believe anything because you're going down their line of thinking. I always kind of think about this when I go into, you ever listen to like when they go and interview like serial killers? And so they go interview serial killers and they start explaining to you, and they go down this whole dynamic process of their life, and they thought like this and this happened and all these other things. And they lead you to a point, and all of a sudden, they've killed somebody, and you're like, hold on, for like a split second, you're like, wait a second, he made that sound so casual that was logically the next step was like, yeah. So then, I took her out back, took out my hatchet, and went to work, whatever, right? And he goes down this thing, and you're like, okay, yes, just going straight to Z there, you're like, no, I would never agree with that. But when he walks you down his line of thinking and how he got to this point in his life and how all these things happen and how the system did this and blah, 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 and all these other things, and you're like, I could see how that, whatever, right? So the line of thinking there is the same thing too. Is I used to think just like that, like, okay, well, I'll, develop the athlete first, I'll rein it back in later on, right? The problem is, again, along with that, is that you're constantly training your CNS system, and also as well is that you're teaching them habits that are not good, which is just, again, like, for example, like we've talked about this before, but again, this is the same thing when we go back to like a fighter, and you're like, okay, I'm just gonna let him throw haymakers, and then later on we'll tighten it up, right? The problem is again, like, I think I told this before. I know, Cody, you've definitely heard it, is, again, where I was at 108, where Wes McGuire at the time, who's now with the Braves, and again, he was our pitching coordinator over there. I think he's doing some, well, I know he's a team coach, but I know he's working on some things with them as well, is that he came up and asked me one day, he goes, is that true? Do you just tighten it up later? Or do you actually have to start all the way back over with how they're creating force? And it's so funny now because we have force plates and everything else, is, yes, you're developing an athlete, but you're also teaching them to be athletic in a particular way. You're teaching them to create force in a particular way that might not be very well suited for them
Right.
as they develop as an athlete to actually be able to hit.
Mm-hmm.
And so, for example, and the same thing is like right there, it's like there is multiple ways to create torque. There is multiple ways to create force. There's multiple ways to create rotational velocities. And along with that, some of them are there's multiple ways to do it, but there's only so many ways. And on top of that, some of them are more efficient than the others, right? So, for example, like off the tee, you'll see our professional athletes, and that happens a lot. Is a lot of times off the tee, they're not hitting the ball as hard as, for example, it might be I have 15-year-olds that hit the ball harder than our pro guys do off the tee. The problem is how the technique that the 15-year-old is hitting off the tee with, that's not going to play in a game with the velocities that these pro guys are hitting with, and what they're working on. And yes, if I just told the pro guy, hey, I don't care where this ball goes, don't worry about this rep, do whatever, hit this ball as hard as you can, the pro guy's gonna be able to hit the ball harder, right? But that's just not how he's actually moving. And also, too, when it comes to ground force, we see the same thing, right? Where there's these 15-year-old kids that can create more ground force than the pro guy in particular ways, right? But with that being said, like the reason the professional athlete's not doing that is like that's not part of his technique. He's not trying to create force that way. It's not that he can't create more force that way. That's not the technique that he's using, and he doesn't need force like this kid does to do what he's doing. So that's a big, a massive piece there as well. And then the other thing I wanted us to kind of touch into as well, Cody, is the transition from cage to the field is also the change in mentality. Like change in mentality is very different, right? So why don't you kind of open that up of why there needs to be a change in mentality from, cage to field?
Yeah. Before we go into that too, I just want to point out it's like we love to make things. It goes both ways. We love to make things more complicated, and sometimes we like to oversimplify them.
Yep.
And so I think it's funny. It's like I know there's a story out there that's probably doesn't follow this, but in general, we all learned our ABCs before we learned to write. We didn't learn to write before we learned our ABCs. When you learned to drive, you didn't just get in a car that's going 100 mile an hour and say, hey, take the wheel. Like you start slow, and then you build up those skills over time. And we tend to go so far down this route, and hey, just swing as hard as you can. You'll figure it out. And we'll fix the technique later.
Yeah.
Right. And so,
do the ball, hit the ball.
Yeah, just to kind of simplify that thought, like, think of anything else that we just go balls to the wall 110% before we work on technique. In general, we don't. In a lot of aspects in our life, and then from the mindset too, with that from like cage to game is, I had a lot of conversations with kids recently too, about it's so common now to want to get results instantaneously, and want things to transfer so instantaneously, which you could mark it up as a lot of different things, but with social media and just how our world is now, it's like, we want it now. Amazon Prime, we order something, we get it that day or 2 days. Like there is no waiting. If we don't get it in 2 days, we throw a fit. It's just, there's so many things that are so expedited and quick now, that I think more than anything, the mindset, and it's funny because like, we've always talked about this, trust the process, right? But the mindset of one, you're going into the cage, and there's different days, different situations, right? Like if I have a hitter that plays on Tuesday and he comes in on Monday, I'm not going to sit here and take him apart and do a bunch of stuff that he sucks at. But like the analogy you always say too is like, it's like a NASCAR, like you work on it all year long, multiple years long. But I mean, you have race days in between when you're working on your car. And so again, those days, like we may touch on some things that, you need to continue to get better at, right? And there may be some cues like, hey, barrel across the chest or something like that. Like Aaron, back in the day, hey, don't touch the PVC pipe with your hip, like stay behind. These little things that, okay, you're doing that aren't good, and we may work on it a little bit, but then also too, the last half of the session, we'll work on, okay, how do we maximize what we are good at to go compete tomorrow or today, whatever the day is. And really the big mindset issue that I've seen with a lot of the kids is like they want to take they want to go work on what they're not good at to get better, and then they go take that to the game right now. They can't separate. Or they come into the cage and they don't like to work on what they're not good at. They only want to do what they're good at because they don't like failing. And I know there's a lot of different things that we can go on with mindset from the two, but those are the two most common I've seen.
Mm.
Is there's some kids that have some success at the high school level,
Mm.
and we sit here and we tell them like, I'm happy you're a 300 hitter. Like, sure beats the heck out of being a 200 hitter,
Mm.
but also like, you're not a Power 5 player
No,
hitting 300 at this level with the competition you're facing. Like,
for sure.
you got to perform better than
Yeah.
300, and that's tough for them to grasp for a little while. Like, hey, you're going to come in here and you're probably going to fail because there's some things that you're not doing very well. There are some things you are doing well, but there's some things you're not doing well. And if you want to be a Power 5 player, you want to get drafted one day,
Mm.
you want to go wherever your goals are, like, you got to get better at this. Like,
Mm.
it's not, can't just keep doubling down on this one thing that you're doing really well, especially with how much data and analytics and information there is out there. Like,
Yeah.
even at the college level, you're getting pitched to a specific way.
Yeah.
Like, they have scouting reports that are more detailed than ever. Now
Mhm.
they have video of every game ever, right?
Yeah.
You're not running into a series in college that they don't have every at bat you've had all year. Like,
Mm.
just doesn't happen anymore.
Yeah.
And so like with that too is like,
Well, it does at lower levels, but your
Yeah,
your
well,
point being upper
yeah.
levels at those Power
yeah,
Five
and even
type
lower levels.
programs.
Like, I played at a junior college in every one of my games, and I know it's
Yeah.
a D1 JUCO. I'm sure there's some
Yeah.
that don't, but to some capacity, there's a level of video.
Mhm.
To some capacity at almost every level, it seems like even
Yeah.
high school.
At least
they're all
at a minimum, they're looking at your stats and going, okay, this
Yeah.
guy's a power guy. This guy strikes out a lot. This guy hits a bunch of balls to left field,
Mhm.
or again, he's a high average dude, so he's a guy
where
that
you hit the
hard to
ball.
get out. Yeah,
Yeah,
100%.
and so like you have all that, and the kids don't want to work on what they're not good at because they're having success, and then maybe they do start working on what they're not good at, and then they take a little dip for a week or two in their in-game results, right? Because out here, I'm not from Vegas, but we don't play year-round in Kansas City.
Mm.
You have quite a few
Seasons.
months in between that
Yeah.
you take a break, you go play another sport, or you
Yeah.
train. It's like, and so again, they're playing year-round, and so we're constantly working around that schedule too. And it's like, okay, well, I had a bad weekend, this and that, blah 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 blah, and it's like, okay, how do you navigate through that too? And then you talk
Mm.
to them and you find out, well, I tried thinking about this or that or whatever, which was like one cue in the middle of the
Mhm.
session that maybe I didn't even think was super significant that stuck to
Yeah.
it, which is why communication's super important for a coach and a player. To see where their head's at and what helped them and help and give them that structure. But they're thinking this cue and it's like, well, um, you know, I could see why you were having some issues in game.
For sure.
If that's the only thing you were thinking about, like you're trying to fix a symptom.
Yeah.
All these different things, we could go down a lot of different directions, but
Mhm.
then they get in game and they think this and they struggle, and then they go back to their old way because they start to fail a little bit and they're like,
Mhm.
well, this sucks, I was hitting 300 the other way,
Yeah,
I was 2 for 10 this weekend, this is
Yeah.
stupid.
for sure.
Or they're so infatuated with the process,
Mm.
right, which is kind of like more of like what I was when I played.
Yeah.
And so it's super interesting. They get so infatuated with the process that they forget there is a moment that it is, let's compete, let's
For
play the
sure.
game, right? And I would go out there too personally. And so, I see these kids that we train and it's like, oh yeah, I went 2 for 10 this weekend, but it's cool because like, I'm worried about 4 years from now,
Mm.
and then I took that mindset every single year until I was like, okay, well, it's too late now.
Mhm.
Like there is that component of, okay, like I am training, I am always getting better because even big leaguers are always getting better, but also like they don't
Mhm.
go out there and just not compete. Like they go out
Mhm.
there and try to win the game.
For
they're
sure.
they're fighting for money more than anything.
Yeah.
Their statistics
Yeah.
get them paid.
Well, and again, for perfect examples, out like let's say, Tom Brady's out there on Sunday, right? And he misthrows his first drive. He misthrows every single ball he throws, right? And it's down to the left.
Mm.
Well, he's going to make an adjustment. He knows his body of what doing along with it. The problem is again also too, is sometimes, especially with younger athletes, they don't know enough to make the adjustment.
Mm-hmm.
They don't know enough about their body. They don't know enough about their process. They don't know enough. They know, and also too, we have plenty of players that know enough to mess themselves up,
Mm-hmm.
right? And that's where it comes into, for example, that's where it comes into for twofold. What you're saying is one, trusting your process of, hey, you're going to get these results, but also two, what the best case scenario would be is if I was with you in every moment that you were playing baseball when it came to you hitting, and I could be there to give you some cues and all these other things until you understood your body enough to do some of these things, or you just moved so well that it just, again, a lot of these things didn't happen as much. But along with it, when they get stuck in the in-between where they're trying to, think, they're trying to do all these other things and figure it out rather than just being like, for example, I also sucked when I was 13 years old or 12 years old or 10 years old or whatever age, 15, 20, 23. Like, I also had plenty of weekends that I was terrible, right? And also, too, like, you think when Trout goes freaking 0 for 26 that, he's not trying to make an adjustment? Like, of course he's trying to make an adjustment. Sometimes you're just going to suck, and that just is. And again, at the end of the day, when it comes to CNS and training, all those other things, like, you're not going to win at everything you do all the times. Like, you need to learn that with life anyways. Sometimes you're going to suck. Look at your video, try to make an adjustment, get back in there and play again. And at the end of the day, like, yes, there's plenty of times. Again, I try to make an adjustment every at bat. That one day I struck out 7 times in 9 at bats. But at the same time, like, it doesn't mean that all of a sudden I got a hit in the next at bat. And it also doesn't mean that I wasn't trying to make adjustments.
Yeah.
Both can be true at the same time, right? So, like, when coaches are like, make an adjustment, like, you think the kid wants to strike out? Of course he doesn't want to strike out. He's trying something else, right? He's trying, it's just, again, he's probably making the wrong adjustment. Or on top of that as well, like, obviously you're yelling at him, make an adjustment because you don't have a more practical cue to give him other than make an adjustment. Well, what the hell does that mean to him, right? Does that mean, again, does that mean think ground ball to second base? Does that mean hit the top of the ball? Does that mean hit the bottom of the ball? Does it mean hit the inside part of the ball? Like, what do I have to think to create what I need to create? Does that mean not get big? Does it mean stay smaller here? That's where, like, the art of also coming in, not only as a player, but also too as a coach, is, again, like, I took a lot of pride in how I talked to our hitters when I coached first base, right? I was very particular with what I said to our hitters. I didn't get up there and go, like, come on, kid, rip something in the gap. For certain guys, that's not going to work. It's going to be something bad for them. And that's not how you cue them. Even in two, and I know I told you this as well, is like, a lot of people don't pick up in subtleties of what I do in the cage. Certain hitters, like, for example, it happened the other day when we had Chewy in here, right? Chewy was, again, Brandon likes to throw fast-paced BP, and he starts to speed you up. And as a hitter that gets jerky and those, again, can get Yankee and all those other things, you got to learn to slow down. So what do I do as a coach? Intentionally, I slow down how I'm talking to him, lower my tone, start to talk slow to calm his brain down and his nervous system, just like I'm doing right now, right? Rather than talking with a whole bunch of energy and saying, hey, man, let's get back in there. I'm speeding him up, right? So as a coach, specifically in the same way, is I'm very intentional there. And sometimes, again, just like when a coach calls time and brings over to from the third base box, and he comes and talks to a hitter and he tries to help him slow it down, right? Same thing when you go to the mound and you help a guy slow it down. Like, hey, sometimes too, this pace is working against you and you're getting sped up and you're getting jerky and you're getting all these other things are starting to happen. And you need to feel like you're slow motion dancing up here. You got to feel like, for example, some of you you have to play like you're at a 2, right? And some guys have to play like they're at a 8, balls to the wall. So that guy, I might have to get him fired up. I might have to yell at him and get him, again, where I need him to be, where, again, I'm like, I need to kick him in the ass a little bit and get him going. And that's what gets him going, pull him to the side and say, yo, you're the team captain, get your shit together. Like, let's go. And sometimes that I need to do that too, right? And that's where, as a coach, the same thing happens when you're in the cage, is along with that is like, hey, this is what this looks like. And this is where, again, Rudy actually talked to me about this a while ago, is saying like, hey, like, I feel like you guys also too have a tough gig. And again, along with this, like, I mean, we get stupid results with the guys, but in these certain moments, we're certain dudes where there is a big role for your hitting coach or your coach on the field, right? To get a player to perform. That's their job too, also, to get the player to perform at a certain level. Is that, for example, when I'm at Rudy's, I used to train a lot of kids on Rudy's team. So I would go to their games, and when I'd go to their games, like, they would like super rake on a lot of, like, especially a lot of guys that we worked with, because again, like, they would hit whatever, ground out the shortstop, whatever those things are. They come in the dugout, I cue them up on something, gave them, again, something like, hey, like, think 40% ball is second baseman here. Boom, hammers the ball in the gap, his next AB. Like, again, and all these other things, like, would happen with those things. But again, like, we're not going to be at the field with everybody. And it's also good for them too as well. It's not that we shouldn't be there. Because again, just like anything else, just like, being a parent in that same way, is that, yeah, in the beginning part of your life, I'm going to be there a lot, bro. I'm going to be there a lot. I'm going to feed you. I'll make sure you got food, all these other things. When you're freaking 35, I'm probably not going to be there that much.
Yeah.
Right? Like, you're going to have to hold your own stuff down. But I don't abandon, and it's not either or. I don't abandon you when you're first born, right? And also, too, I'm not going to sit there and baby you when you're 35, right? There is this progression of what that looks like. And for a hitter, it's the same way. And again, a lot of times, too, it doesn't help when you also have, this happens a lot, where you have parents that the moment the game's over want to talk about your performance, right? And not in a positive light, not in a thing of like, one, understanding. This is why I always tell you, like, I like to go swing, is to remind myself of how hard it is to get those things to happen and to get these changes to happen. Is hitting is really hard. And so through that process, again, most people get frustrated and they let the frustration of the moment overwhelm and get taken out on their son or their daughter or other coaches or whatever that is. And they let the frustration of the moment become a frustration between two humans, because I can argue with you, I can tell you all these other things, but in reality, I'm really just frustrated with the situation. I'm frustrated because we've been working really hard, and I started to build an expectation for results.
Yeah.
When in reality, that was the issue from the get-go. It had nothing to do with what was actually happening. This weekend was progress, or this tournament was progress. But my problem is I get stuck in this place of I build a relationship with my work correlating with specific results that I want to be there one way or another, when in reality, again, the journey is the reward. There is just working, right? Should be my pleasure, right? And the results being like, yo, I'm not tied up. And you heard Aaron Judge like this last week when they started talking about, hitting over 60 home runs. And he's like, yo, I'm not really focused on like numbers. Like, obviously he's aware of it, and he's like, I don't take this for granted, nothing like that. But what I am saying is, again, how I got to 60 was not about thinking about 60.
Yeah.
Right now, again, someone's already saying, but I saw the video where he said I was going to hit 50 home runs this year. Yes, but game to game, he's not going 50, 50, 50, 50, 50, right? And again, if somebody else thinks like that and that helps them hit, great. I've worked with a lot of hitters that, and again, personal experience, when I'm trying to hit 380 or whatever, like it typically, if I get 5 hits this weekend, I'll be batting, 295, like whatever. Like that typically is not a really good way of, going about it, rather than, again, going from moment to moment and taking care of what's right in front of me. And, what's the, again, staying locked in on the game and all those things that are happening. So that those could be bigger pieces. And that's what I say is, like, as a parent, you obviously want to help your son, your daughter, or again, as a coach, your players, but also too, how you speak to them afterwards is you start to develop. And this is where, again, your traumas start getting, put onto next generations, is also those things as well, is that you might want a result so bad, you start training them to want a result so bad. And it's subconscious with how you have your discussions, because you've tied your identity up in their performance and their results and your team and all these other things, when in reality, it has so much more to do with your relationship with these things, and not having identity in what you do as a coach or your player's success or any of those things, which again is something that we have to constantly surrender, because it's something we can easily fall into over and over and over again. And as a coach, that's something I constantly have to do as well. So I think that those can be massive pieces of learning. Again, like, being a hitter is a journey, not a destination. Like, there isn't I'm a hitter now, my swing is perfect. That never happens. There's never a hitter out there that's like, yeah, my swing's perfect, there's nothing I work on. Like, Mike Trout works on his swing every single day. Miguel Cabrera works on his swing every single day, right? Albert Pujols works on his swing. He's changed his swing multiple times, right? Yeah. Like, on his swing every single day. All these guys work on their swing constantly, right? So again, along with it, it's like, it's never an ending process. It's a it's just what we do. It's what you do. There's no place to get to. It's just constantly, working and going into what that looks like to continue to get better.
Yeah, no, and kind of piggyback off that is, I have siblings, and so as like a parent too, knowing the journey that maybe was taken with a sibling of mine, or I'm going to use my personal journey with my parents, and like, my dad was a hitting coach, baseball coach as well, and so that journey, and then that getting reflected back on my little sister is, so my sister's first year of college, like me and She's never lived away from my parents. Also, first year of college, everyone knows can be an adjustment, meeting new friends. They have a brand new coach that just came in that didn't recruit her. And so there's a lot of different things going on. And
Yeah.
too, she's already battled anxiety before, and like,
Mm.
she's going through all of this, and my parents are still there for her. But anyways, um, the point I want to make is it's funny. I called my dad this weekend, asked how she did, because Omaha, I can't be in Omaha to watch her play. So I'm like, hey, how'd she do? And my sister's always funny. She's very vague about her results. She either nothing good, even though she was 3 for 5 because she had 2 strikeouts, or like everything was perfect, even though like it was one bomb and she was 1 for 4 and struck out 3 times. It's just
Yeah.
different. So I asked my
Yeah.
dad, who again, coach, and he's funny is is he was like, well, she took a fastball down the middle her first AB. I thought we were over that. And I was like, well, what do you mean? And he goes, well, we dealt with that with you for years. And then I don't know if he proceeded to bring that up to her.
Yeah.
But then I felt for like, hey, my dad's probably going to go hound her about taking a fastball down the middle the first AB she gets
For sure.
as a, freshman
Yeah.
in college, whatever. And I'm like, that was me. That was my journey. I was the one that struggled with that. And then he gets pissed
Yeah.
in a sense. It was like, why are you taking that? And it's like,
Mm.
that was my fault. I did that for 3 years where he would always get mad at me
Yeah.
for that, and then reflects on my sister. It's like, whatever. And so
I was the
like, with
opposite,
that,
bro. I was trying to hit a ball to Africa the first ball.
but it's just funny because like I'm seeing that. It's like, well, now she's getting that feedback from my dad, and she was like, I don't even know why you're saying this. I've never taken a fastball in the middle of my life. I did it one time.
Yeah.
And he's like freaking out.
Yeah.
Like, because of that. And then also too is she goes 3 for 5 with like 5 RBIs, but she
Mhm.
struck out twice.
Yeah.
My dad's like, well, that crap's not gonna fly. 2 strikeouts. And I was like, well, how's her swing look? And he's like, well, she's really long. She's getting really big.
Mhm.
Doesn't look really good. And I'm like, okay, well, she went 3 for 5 and her swing doesn't look good. Imagine when she starts to tighten some of this stuff up,
Mm.
right? And I'm like, trying to give him that feedback too, because
Yeah.
again, I know her dealing with some anxiety. Like, he's gonna go say something about the 2 strikeouts,
Mhm.
and now that's gonna be on her head all week.
For sure.
When she went 3 for 5 with like 5 RBIs in her first college game,
For sure.
as a freshman,
Yeah.
I'm just like, take the
Yeah.
dubs, like,
Take the dub,
I,
for
I didn't do that when I played. I was like 2 for 4, and both of them were, little flares over first base. I'd be kicking myself, and then one of our best hitters would do the same thing, and he'd be like, I hit 500 today, and he was like freaking out. It's like
Yeah.
that mindset difference and whatnot, and so
Mhm.
it's just funny, bringing that up is like from a sibling perspective. I'm seeing that kind of happen with my sister. Like,
Yeah.
my dad, again, is putting that on her, when too part of that was like, it's my fault.
We love you,
that
Dad.
he's- No, but it's funny because like I'm seeing it with her.
For
And,
sure.
like, we all have our own conversations. My brother talks to her. My brother's
For
a
sure.
baseball coach.
For sure.
I do this, and so
Yeah,
I
yeah.
talk to her. My dad talks to her, and then my mom, like, she's just like, we still all love you.
Yeah,
My mom
yeah.
has her part.
sure.
So
For sure.
it's just interesting seeing those different, I don't
Yeah.
know, perspectives on it and those
Mhm.
different conversations. But
Well, it can get
you know,
it can get
forward.
it can get hard too, because again, like bringing it back to like the pros conversation. So we had a couple pros come in right here at the end of the season. Still had some games left here locally. Aviators AAA for the Athletics, and so anyways, like two of these guys come in. And again, like do an evaluation, give them some simple things to focus on, whatever, and then it just so happened like they go off,
Mm.
right? And they have both of them have like 6 home runs within 2 games. The one guy hits for the cycle. And then also went on to in 280 at bats, he hit 5 home runs, no triples, and a couple doubles. Good amount of doubles, I believe. I think like 8 or something like that, or something like that. And then in 27 ABs, he matches his home run total. He hits 5, 2 triples, a couple doubles, whatever, right? And the other guy, I think literally since he came from his stuff, I think he's hit a home run almost in every game that he's played in. And also too, now he's the PCL like home run champion of the league. So in any case, along with that, I'm like, hey, and then they, kind of talked about it too. Is like, hey, we used the, farm boards last week, and before they had came in, and they're like, we both hit a jack that game, and I'm like, well, I hope it works that way every time. Now, again, along with that, something of a sample size that big, where you're going to like, almost 30 ABs, and you match your home runs from the whole year of 280 at bats, almost 300 at bats. There's obviously something different happening, right? I'm not trying to downplay that other side, but the dangers that you have of getting results like that is that it sets this expectation that it's always going to be like this.
Mm.
And as soon as I do these things, that all of a sudden I'm going to start hitting all these away. And that doesn't always work that way. A lot of times it's more of a trend.
Mm.
Now, if there obviously is at that level, a little tweak can be a big deal.
Mm-hmm.
Especially too when you're waking up a pattern of how, for example, like this guy, for example, again, he's hit for power in the past and he was really struggling this year and had lost some things. So waking up some things that he used to do and giving him some awareness of it where he could train it specifically and make sure it's a staple inside of his drills every day was a big deal for him. Right. And so that could be very important, again, for some of those guys where these little tweaks can do some major things. But also too, like I always tell them as well, is like, hey, like I don't have magical pixie dust. Like, at the end of the day, like, it has to be the right things. Obviously, what we're saying obviously made an impact where, both you and I think in one game, they together had a, 26 total bases or something like that. Obviously there is some massive things that are happening. Again, it just didn't all of a sudden, I hit 300 bats and all of a sudden I hit, oh, I just got hot, and that's a statement within baseball, like, oh, he's hot right now. Well, like he's doing things differently, right? Like 99% of the time he's going to move different, right? And it could be conscious or not conscious, right? He's moving better. Okay. Second, on top of that as well, like how he's handling failure and all those other things and how he's in a good place mentally is probably a massive part of that as well. But I think it also always kind of gets coined off. It always gets coined off in the presence of, oh, like, again, he's just hot right now. Well, what does that mean? Because I would like to be hot more often, right? So let's like break that down of what hot is. And it's not just a feeling. It's not the ball is, again, there's these symptoms of the ball looks like a beach ball and I have so much time and blah, 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 these other things. Okay, but why? Yeah. Right? And so there's all that where we like to unpack and kind of go into that. But the bigger pieces of like, again, within that translation of what it comes from, like in the cage where like, again, for a pro, like we just activated something, gave them one drill that they did prior pregame, and then boom, like they can make some of those things. And that's not always the case with every pro, so don't coin it that way. But like, oh, that's so easy because they're pros. No, there's a lot of pros that, again, like that is not the case by far. I worked with far many pros where it's taken years to get them places. But when you're just activating something like that, it could be as easy as that. And that's where it comes into where, again, the skill and artwork of a coach of knowing what, when, where, why, how I talk to them, what I need to talk to them about, what they need to focus on. Again, we had a conversation with the, parent this back list last weekend. And again, it goes into like some coaches and a lot of things there's some truth to getting too stuck on like movement in the sense of, he's doing this, he's doing this, he's doing this, he's doing that. Yeah. But in game, he's not going to he can't think about this, that, this, and that. Right. Even though in the cage, we might be able to do some of those things, and it might be very particular in that same way. Kind of like that route analogy that I talked about later, is we have a little bit more time because we're not in such a hurry, because slower ball speeds, I can talk to you in between swings. We can do all these other things. Okay, we can talk about this new route and how to get there, when to turn left, when to turn right, what the, the speed limit of the road is, what we have on the radio, all these, we can do all those things, right? Because we have more time to do so. But when it's, rush time, it's like, hey, it's time to go. Those are things that happen. And again, a lot of times, again, like Cody, like we talked about, and also too, as you saw then, it's like I'm cueing something else completely different that's going to get the movement, not that those same movements not to happen. But instead of talking about, his hip hinge and X, Y, and Z, it's like, hey, get to a good place to hit, get to your good, your place you're going to launch from, and, think 40%, right? And that, boom, like, can that really work for guys, right? And a lot of times, like, again, that approach is not going to work for everybody. Yeah. But there is certain things that can be more like, we kind of talk about it, like it could be like penicillin, where it really helps a lot of things by, isolating on a couple things that, again, this is the other hard part. The cues and what they're thinking about does matter, right? I can tell them, again, sometimes it's a placebo. It could be think right pinky toe, right? And boom, they crush because of right pinky toe, right? But also too, sometimes it's, again, specifically like where I'm giving a specific cue because I know how it's going to get them to move because we've interacted in the past and I've had plenty of movers like them before, and I'm going by, again, past experience of like, hey, let's think this, or, top spin a ground ball to the second baseman, and all of a sudden the guy hits a home run. He's like, what the heck? I was trying to top spin a ground ball to second baseman. It's like, yeah, but there's a reason I gave you that cue. Yeah. Right? Like I knew what it was going to create for you specifically.
One of those professionals that you were talking about literally said that word for word. it really matters what you think about, man.
Yeah,
Like literally, like word for word. It's like
for sure.
it really does.
Yeah, and how it again that goes back into your CNS system and what it looks like and like what you're doing on deck circle, pregame, all those things like they do matter. And again, it's a lot to unpack. It's not something where again I think everybody wants this simple. Okay, just tell me the approach I'm supposed to have. Tell me I'm supposed to like no like you independently as a hitter go talk to big leaguers. All of them have different things they're thinking about.
Mhm.
All of them have different specific routines that they do. All of them do all these different things. And is there overlap between for sure, but at the same time, very specific in that same way along with it. So yeah, so I think there's definitely more. I think you also said I think we skipped over one in the middle. One of the other things we'll have to knock it down in another podcast. I know we in the very beginning. I'll have to wind it back and remember your first initial ones, but we kind of unpacked a couple of those. But yeah, definitely some big things we'll continue to unpack and it not be just a one size one conversation and all of a sudden you're mastered the craft. That's why I love baseball so much. It's not that easy. If it was that easy, it wouldn't be that interesting.
Right.
So definitely not that easy. It's a complicated thing. We did have some boys hit some bangs this weekend, which was fun. Cool. Also, new thing we talked
Had
about.
some of the young kids go off too. I haven't told you about too.
Oh,
so
good,
we had a
good.
good weekend all around.
Good weekend all around. Yeah, love that. Also, new thing we kind of talked about it before the podcast. One of the things I wanted to start doing is to close out is that I wanted to say a prayer with everybody. So yeah, we're gonna start doing that at the end. That's how we're gonna close out. So let's get that in. Let's get that in. All right. Dear and Father, thank you so much for bringing us here today and all the different ways that you're moving in all of our lives. We're so thankful that we continue to be blessed with the gifts that you've given us and all the different ways that you're continuing to move through our lives and form us to spread your kingdom. We're so grateful to be used by you and God, we're your servants, and we just ask that you continue to work through us. And continue to use our platform to spread your kingdom. We ask all these things in Jesus' name. Amen. All right, y'all, go crush your week. Oops. All right, y'all, I'll go crush your weeks. We'll see you guys here soon. But until next time, Farm System out.